follow that, to be honest. I'll have a word with Jeff later for putting me on second after Carl. So yes, thank you very much for inviting me to speak. And yeah, well done to Jeff and everyone who helped organise this meeting. I think it's fantastic to have. I wanted to just use my time to talk a bit about, I think, the challenges that we face as anti-racists, but also some of the positive victories that we've actually managed to have over the past few years. And unfortunately, I think I have to start by saying I think we're probably in the midst of one of the most racist general elections certainly in my lifetime, and obviously other people will judge it as well. But I think the mainstream political parties all seem to have signed up to an austerity agenda, and they've decided that they're wanting to use racism, a classic weapon of mass distraction, I think, as Salma Yaqub put it so well. And they're trying to do this to kind of divide communities and blame anyone but the bankers, and for the economic crisis. They're attacking immigrants, asylum seekers, and refugees. And I think it's very poignant, actually, what you said about people's attitudes to those actually fleeing from oppression is to put them in such abusive, kind of horrific institutions. And that's a shame, a stain on Britain. I also think as well that Diane Abbott is right. I think the debate that we have, the debate that we have around immigration is so often actually about race and racism. I think that's an important point to make, because it's having such a poisonous impact and toxic impact on society. Racist assaults and attacks are rising. Mosques are routinely threatened. We've seen, the horrific reality of day-to-day racism of the Chelsea fans pushing a black man off the metro in Paris. And the political debate is just constantly dominated by who will be the toughest on immigration. So I just think it obviously falls to us to stand up to this racism and fight for an alternative that Carl talked about. And I think it's important to do so in this, when we do this, to remind ourselves that campaigning against racism does make a difference. I just want to always, I make this point because I think it's helpful. So I think we need to pay tribute to, the Lawrence family, for example. As many of you will know, Stephen Lawrence was an 18-year-old student when he was killed in a racist attack in 1993 in South London. And obviously, as many of you will know, the police failed to properly investigate this murder and were obviously revealed to be institutionally racist. But following, obviously, 2 decades of campaigning, the Lawrence's family finally received some bit of justice, and 2 of Stephen's murderers were jailed at long last. Because I think it really is about families like the Lawrences, the Riggs, the Duggans, people like Maz Salim, who's campaigning for justice for her father, who was killed here in Birmingham, who display such incredible courage and strength in the face of such adversity. I think we can learn a lot from them. And I think and the last time I think I came to Birmingham was on an anti-EDL demonstration. And I think, obviously I'd say demonstration, really a kind of an attempt to terrorise kind of diverse communities, especially like Birmingham, parts of London, and up and down the country. But we managed to mobilise kind of our opposition and kind of say, actually, we like our diverse, multicultural society, and we don't want the people like the EDL to divide us. And also the BNP, where I grew up, they received 1 in 4 votes. My next-door neighbour, she was a lovely woman, but she was a member of the BNP. And in 2009, the BNP secured 1 million votes in the European elections and won 2 MEPs. And I think we should just ask ourselves, really, where are the BNP now? Well, they're nowhere, because we actually organised against them to stop them. We got people out on the ballot boxes, mobilised the vote, had the demonstrations, did all we can, and kicked them out of power. And I think that's a real victory that we can be proud of. But obviously, our struggle against racism continues now, and we're faced by new challenges and kind of threats. I mean, obviously, many of you will probably seen today, Nigel Farage has been on television, all the media, talking about racism doesn't exist in society. He's always, whenever he's late to anything, he wants to blame, immigrants for making him late. It's just, all that kind of, we have to deal with that. We've got Pegida, who are a vile organisation from Germany, attempting to kind of organise in Britain. And we've seen the renewed kind of attacks as well on civil liberties and the kind of from the war on terror with the new counter-terrorism and security bill. In the media as well, we've seen, in the United States, we've seen a new wave of protests, saying very loudly in the face of what are modern-day lynchings by the racist police that actually black lives matter. And anyone who has seen 12 Years a Slave or Selma knows that obviously racism runs extremely deep in the US, but actually so does resistance to racism, and I think, you know, as their ancestors did, they too will overcome. I wanted to say a bit, because I'm a student officer for Unite Against Fascism, and unfortunately our campuses are not immune to this kind of growing climate of racism. You know, many students that I speak to, you know, just kind of talk about how they're stopped and searched as if it's normal. I've had students that talk about they're going on the way to college, they've had their headscarves ripped off. Nazi swastikas, many of you will have seen, were scrawled in Birmingham University only a few weeks ago. And research that we conducted shows that 1 in 5 young black students will experience a racist hate crime during their time of study. I think that's absolute just disgrace. But in response to this, we've had to take on racism and organise against this. And I want to just share a couple of the stories that we've, successes that we've had, and I think many of you have been part of and supportive of. So I study at London Metropolitan University. It's one of the most diverse campuses in the whole of the country. And in 2012, when the Tories tried to deport 2,550 or so international students from that campus, you know, we had to organise against that. So we organised petitions, we organised protests, and actually, because of an anti-racist campaign that united and brought together the entire community, we managed to make it so that those students could actually finish their studies and weren't deported, you know, a few weeks into their final years for some of them. That's a real victory, and it shows that we can make a difference. And in Birmingham, with Birmingham Metropolitan College, David Cameron came out in support, you'll remember, last year in support of the veil ban that was there, and we had to again organise, and within 24 hours I think we had a petition of 10,000 people on it, and we were calling a protest, and actually they backed down. So, you know, people in Birmingham, we in this room, managed to beat obviously that disgusting policy, but also take on the Prime Minister. I think that is pretty good, because quite frankly, you know, a woman's right to choose what she wants to wear is not up for debate. And I think these victories should remind us that we do make a difference, and that's why March 21st I think is the next step and is so important. Before I finish, I want to touch a bit on the horrific events recently that we've kind of dominated the news in Europe. So the murders in Paris, Copenhagen, the targeting of the kosher supermarket, and the attack outside the synagogue. And these are appalling attacks, obviously designed to spread fear and hatred, and they've been condemned by people from across all faiths and none, and across all backgrounds. And I think it's very important that as we mark the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, that we just renew our commitment to making sure that we never allow anti-Semitism to reach the levels it did before. We never allow that scourge to take hold, and when we say never again, we mean it. I also find really troubling that there was obviously wall-to-wall coverage, quite rightly, for these attacks, but at the same time there was 3 young Muslim students were murdered in a university in America, and these students were fundraising, you know, for homeless people, and doing really good stuff. And the media tried to say, oh, it was a racist attack, but the media tried to say that it was a parking dispute. And, you know, I just think, imagine if it was the other way around. I just think that, you know, the media would definitely have a different view about covering it. And I think as politicians and influential figures are shamefully lining up to blame the entire Muslim community for what happened after Paris, it just really shows, well, there was a hashtag that trended worldwide, kill all Muslims, and there was no international outcry about that. I think that's a massive shame. I think, unfortunately, Muslim people are too often consistently portrayed as the perpetrators of but never the victims of terrorism and hatred. So as I've said, and I'll just end here, racism clearly tears communities apart, and that's why we have to unite against it. So across Europe and in New York and other places across the world, on March 21st we'll be marching to say that we actually want an alternative to racism and the divisive politics of the far right. I hope to see you all on a massive Birmingham block. I'm very excited to be welcoming everyone to it. If you're students, please get in touch and have a student block. It's going to be very vibrant and loud. We want them to hear us very loudly ahead of the general election, that we want an alternative to racism. We won't be divided by it, and we stand for a united, multicultural, diverse society that everyone is free to live and thrive in. So thank you very much. I look forward to hearing what you have to say.